We have done a standing watch program titled Trump Meets Germany's Chancellor Merz, What Was Most Critical? And to give you a brief summary, it says the long-awaited meeting between German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump has happened in the Oval Office. Merz has been encouraged not to appear as supplicant, in German Bittsteller, but to stand up to Trump. However, most official topics or most critical topics were not discussed, and Trump did most of the talking. Oh yeah, that's not anything new. But the Ukraine-Russia war was addressed, and in that respect, one could see disagreements between the two leaders. One comment by Trump stands out, which, in the light of biblical prophecy, was of paramount importance. Now, if you haven't watched the Standing Watch program, please do so, because I'm not going to tell you here what that comment was. But it was, when I heard it, and I heard it live, I felt it was really interesting what was stated there. But things have come to my attention after I did the Standing Watch program, which, if I had known about them before, I would most certainly have included those events. Now, there's nothing in the American press which even remotely alludes to it. There are only very, very few articles which talk about it, and of course they're all in German. And so what I like to do right now is to read those to you, and I had to translate those from German into English. But it's interesting what happened, what might have happened. Der Western, one of these German publications, wrote on June 5. Former Bild editor-in-chief Julian Reichelt. Now, the Bild magazine we quote quite a bit, and Julian Reichelt was at one time the editor-in-chief. But then there was a separation of ways. We don't know exactly what happened, and so he started his own empire. So this article says, former Bild editor-in-chief Julian Reichelt could have caused the bombshell of the day. Many press representatives from Berlin had already anticipated an unpleasant surprise for Friedrich Merz in the Oval Office, possibly even a scandal. Just as with the visits of Zelensky and South African President Ramaphosa, would Trump want to expose and humiliate his guest from Germany? When Reichelt was suddenly spotted in the White House, speculation began. The controversial head of the far-right portal News, I don't think it's far-right, anyhow, this is a magazine which we have quoted from time to time in our updates. So it says the controversial head of the far-right portal News was not traveling to Washington as part of Merz's press delegation. So it was clear that Reichelt was smuggled into the White House by the Trump side for an appearance to attack Merz in the middle of US Capitol in front of the press, that freedom of expression was supposedly restricted in Germany, or that the AfD is being suppressed by the state. Trump's vice president, J.D. Vance, struck a similar tone months ago at the Munich Security Conference. Vance appeared to be sitting on the sofa, lurking with anticipation. But things didn't go according to plan. Reichelt's appearance briefly caused a stir online, but he didn't get a chance to ask Trump or Merz a question. Well, journalist Robin Alexander, who was present in the Oval Office himself, reported. Julian started a question in which the word freedom appeared, but was drowned out. The journalist was unfortunate enough to be seated in the second row, thus not in Trump's direct line of sight. And then Handelsblatt added on June 5, surprise guest in the White House. News editor-in-chief Julian Reichelt is the only German journalist who was not part of the Merz delegation present in the Oval Office. A total of 18 people from the Merz delegation, including journalists, were granted access to the Oval Office. Reichelt managed to attend outside of official channels. His presence underscores two developments. The White House is placing increasing emphasis on the influence of right-wing media, and official channels are becoming less and less relevant for networking and access. Now, why is all of that extremely telling? You see, Friedrich Merz had been warned before his trip to Washington not to fall into the trap like Zelensky had done and the guy from South Africa, a trap which might be prepared by Trump, especially in regard to the issue of freedom of speech and the press in Germany. And he was specifically warned, beware of Vance. And then it was reported that Vance wouldn't even be there at the meeting, and there was a sigh of relief in Germany. And then it was discovered he was there. He was actually sitting on that couch, waiting, perhaps, to intervene, to say some words. Now, at the end, Trump asked twice, wasn't there anybody of the journalists who would have a question for Merz? Was this a setup? But the other journalists had made so much noise, maybe intentionally, so that Reichelt wasn't hurt. And only one asked a question of Merz. I forgot now what the question was, wasn't really all that relevant. The other one asked something of Trump again, and then Trump ended the press conference with his good friend, Friedrich. Now then Merz was interviewed on Fox News, and he said that insofar as the AfD is concerned, the issue didn't even come up, he said, not even in private talks with Trump, because the Trump administration must have recognized by now how problematic the AfD is. He also reiterated that it is Germany's responsibility and Germany's responsibility alone to deal with the AfD and that nobody is going to say anything about it. The issue is not off the table. If in fact there was a coup trying to embarrass Merz, which appears to be the case, it didn't work. Maybe Trump didn't quite see where Reichelt was to have him ask a question. There was no point to bring it up in private, because the whole idea would have been to bring it up in public. Now, I found this article by Mr. Reichelt himself, talking about what happened in the Oval Office. And that's what he wrote today. If it had been up to Friedrich Merz and the federal government, no one from news would have been present at this meeting. He says, our excellent colleague Ralf Schuler has been denied travel as a correspondent since the beginning of Friedrich Merz's term in office, officially, of course, due to space constraints. But as journalists, it is our job to be there, especially when we are not wanted. That is why, after the federal government turned down news, I applied to the US government to be allowed to attend the White House as a reporter, and I succeeded. So I can tell you firsthand what it was like. Even before Friedrich Merz arrived at the White House, a rumor had spread among German journalists that it might actually happen that someone could ask an unwanted question about freedom of expression, sneaking into the delegation and not authorized by the German government. It seemed unthinkable to some colleagues to simply ask this question about freedom of expression themselves. What I also experienced in the Oval Office is this. Donald Trump's governing style must seem like an absolute nightmare of access and transparency to many politicians and their journalistic guards. Journalists are allowed to simply storm into the sacred place in world history, the Oval Office, like a trampling horde of freedom of expression. They are allowed to ask anything, shout and yell at the most powerful man in the world, and this most powerful man in the world answers everything. It would be absolutely unthinkable in Germany that reporters would storm Friedrich Merz's office almost daily to question him harshly and completely unchecked. He goes on to say that during Friedrich Merz's visit to the Oval Office, I as a reporter could witness firsthand that everything Merz told us about Donald Trump was not true. Now, he then talks about the unbreakable friendship between Germany and the United States, and he is known for this idea, this concept. He doesn't understand, of course, biblical prophecy. It's unimaginable to him, Reichelt, that is, that this unbreakable friendship could break up, which it will, and then he will be surprised, as there will be many, many other people. But it is interesting to me that all of this was instigated outside the influence of Friedrich Merz, who didn't want anybody from news, anybody who would ask some questions which he wouldn't like, to be present. But apparently the Trump administration wanted them to be present. Why? Obviously there was some reasoning behind it. Now he made another comment. I quoted this author, this journalist from Welt earlier, talking about Reichelt, and he picked up on that, Robin Alexander, and he said, because he was asked, well, can I say that about you? And he says, well, it's a free country, but I will tell you one thing. Should I ever become in power, you are going to go to jail for 8 years. And then he said, well, that was a joke, so everybody, both of them, they laughed. And then Reichelt went on to say, it would be at least 10 years. Now, even though it was a joke, why would he make a comment like, if I ever come to power? He is in no political position to do that, unless there's more to it. Always good to watch people, to see where they're going, where they are heading. So Merz was saved for now. It would have been extremely embarrassing. I don't think he would have handled it correctly if he would have asked a question about freedom of speech in Germany. But he was saved, but the issue is not off the table, as I said. That is not a dead issue at all. I was watching a video this morning about all the comments Merz had made about Trump. I mean, extremely negative, accusatory comments. Either he lied about it, he never believed it, that was during the campaign when he wanted to become the chancellor, or it's like the leaf in the wind going to and fro, or he is somebody to watch. Because if he really believes what he said about Trump, then that visit has changed nothing. And the animosity between the two friends will grow up to the point of total hostility.